Hi everyone, this is Jaime Alejandro with the Arts Calling podcast, featuring creatives in the literary, visual, and performing arts. Before we get rolling, I'd like to remind you to stop by artscalling.com for the latest episodes and links to our literary projects, including the Coalition Works Literary Journal and our Coalitionist newsletter, which is open for submissions right now. We have a lot of fun over there gathering and crafting joyfully absurd short works, so I hope you join us, especially if you're a fan of cats and would like to help us propagate some cat propaganda. The more the merrier. We need your help this holiday season. Now, enough rambling. Today, I am delighted to be Arts Calling Scott Macklin of the musical collective Now Defunkt. Scott is a highly accomplished and innovative leader in higher education with extensive experience developing and implementing transformative programs and strategies. Central to his work is the notion of storytelling, where stories are forged in the process of deep hanging out, where a story is made in collaboration with a community of practice, where one engages in the act of making the story with people from a particular community, not just about them. The focus of this conversation is about this particular approach and how it all comes together in the creative collective of family and friends known as Now Defunkt. This is more than just a band. It's a vibrant collection of individuals, family, friends, and a diverse group of unique personalities who found a way to create music together, bringing together members from different generations, perspectives, and locations. Their latest release, Jamcation, is now available to stream, and you can get your vinyls presented to you by Washington's Records through the links in the episode description. I really hope you join us on this one because Scott's energy for community is so deeply contagious and exactly the kind of vibe we need right now in the world, folks. I am fired up to gather and create, so go listen to Now Defunkt as soon as possible, fall in love with their sound, and I'll stop talking so we can finally give Scott a call. Well, thank you, Scott, so much for taking the time to chat with me. How are you over there in your neck of the woods?
I would say, on a Monday up here in the Pacific Northwest with the rain falling down, I'd say I'm tranquilo.
Muy tranquilo.
Yeah.
Well, you can't go wrong with that. But let's maybe start talking about a great project that you had this year, because you and your band, if I'm not mistaken, have put out a new record this year called Jamcation. Would you be interested in setting the stage for this project? Because I think we can go all kinds of directions, but maybe it would be best to start there.
Yeah, I like the metaphor of setting the stage, because there's the front of house performers and there's the back of house, and then there's the audience. We're trying to put all those together, but I shift the metaphor a little bit to setting the table, because most of our stuff has to do with the creation and serving of good food. So we're hoping with this album, we've served up a really tasty meal that has a variety of ingredients, but really draws from, I think, the experience and the heart. You can call us a band. We try to frame ourselves a bit like a creative collective. There's a core set of members in the band, but there's always folks weaving and coming and going. And the big difference, and I think what we were able to pull off with this album, this is our third album that we put out, and we're committed to putting out vinyl because there's just something to that sound that we appreciate and the care that it takes to actually produce vinyl. But this album is the first time we, as members of a creative collective, were actually in the same room writing and recording our basic constructs together. Because the band was sort of emerged out of COVID, and we were all geographically separated, creating tracks and then sharing tracks, back and forth in the process we called the defunctory. And then the album emerged. But this one, we actually, about a year ago at this time, made our way down to Vista, California. And a cousin of mine, she graciously lent us her house while they were on a cruise to Alaska. And we brought in mobile recording equipment and turned the upstairs and recording studio and the outside, sort of that California kitchen where we were just outside writing, creating songs and going upstairs to do the tracks. Then we would take walks down to the beach to jump in the ocean, or fire up the grill to cook various components of food. So if you weren't recording, you were cooking. And if you weren't cooking, you were surfing. And if you weren't surfing, you were writing. And if you're doing all three, you were napping. So in that case, we're trying to hit all the major activities. And that's where the frame Jamcation came out of. So we hold the two together to jam, which collectively creates something. But it's also this sense of culture jamming. We want to sense sort of call into question, speak truth to power, criticize, if you will, some of the muckery and the mucked upness of the world today. But you can't just criticize. You then need to energize. And that's the vacation part, to vacation, to have recreation or recreation, to sort of give pause, to ponder, take stock of what you're doing, gather strength so you can go into the task at hand with some energy. So we took jam and vacation, put it together, and put Jamcation. So that was really the table setting, not only sort of the philosophy behind this album, but also the active process by which we worked. And, hopefully your listeners and you, when you give it a listen, will enjoy the tasty bits that we've created.
I can't thank you enough for that intro, because I think it sends us on a whole bunch of different directions. But I've had the pleasure of listening to Jamcation, and it's exactly as you describe it. It is this, my favorite term to describe something that I feel is transcendent and beautiful is kaleidoscopic. And it really is, as you would call it, genre agnostic, and it covers so many different musical bases. But there is at its core this kind of celebration taking place. And I want to commend you on that, because I do think that that's the hardest thing, isn't it? About creating something that is saying something, that trying to provide a service, whether it's spiritual or just entertainment. It's so hard to balance all of those things while carrying that sense of joy and celebration, making it effortless in a way, right?
Yeah, I think there's a field of forces at play, whether you call them politically or economically, environmentally, that I think are working really hard to devalue or neutralize joy. You don't find a lot of joy. And at the same time, joy can get propped up in a Hallmarkian way, right?
Yeah.
Where
Yeah.
it's cheap and thin and veneerish. So how do you get that deep primordial sound box of the joy? We have groans, we're all groaning, but at the same time, collectively trying to work on something together that puts a little energy into the world that hopefully will inspire, influence, shape, change, give someone else, hey, look at what these guys did. I wonder what we can do. And better yet, wow, look at what those guys and girls did. I wonder if they would want to do something with us. Let's connect and let's jam.
Yeah, because I think that's the overall vibe, right? Is the need to share this contagious thing. Can joy be a contagion, and can it spread, especially right now? I mean, that was the
Yeah.
vibe that I got, because it was so welcoming, right? Like, you start with Jamcation, title track, and immediately it is a almost a chanting, celebratory sort of like, I hate to say church-like, but maybe there was a communal, maybe that's a better way to describe it,
Yeah.
a sense of like communal coming together. And of course, you still have other directions that you tackle in the other tracks, but Jamcation as the first track, I think, really makes that statement front and center.
Yeah. I think, I don't shy away from church, like, although there are some aspects of church that I can be allergic to. But, when you go into a church service, you can experience collective effervescence. When you're singing with other people, it does resonate and do something, I think, fundamentally sound. So there is something about the song Jamcation where we wanted to create, particularly the way the rhythms work in that song, and that subtle underneath steel drum part, just trying to get at that, again, that primordial heartbeat of the soul. And then my son Case is the one who really took that lyric to the next level that I really appreciate, and I loved it when he goes, and it reminds me of what my father used to say, it matters not the journey, but the company you keep. And this deep hanging out, you might find what you seek. So this notion of deep hanging out is really important for us.
What a beautiful phrase, especially the pleasure of having experience that with your family? Because obviously these
Yeah.
are friends who are also collaborators, right? I imagine. And
Oh, yeah.
I mean, what's that like to create and collaborate with your family?
So yeah, let me back up and just set the table a little better, which I
Sure.
should have done. So I apologize with
Oh no,
the
we're going all
who.
over the place.
Who is this? So you know, it started with a series of conversations with myself and my longtime friend and professional agitator, Steve McMahon. We go back almost 35 years in our friendship. He was, I find him to be a very eclectic and tasteful guitar player. At that time, I didn't have much musical playing, always loved music, but I didn't consider myself a musician because early on, music didn't come to me readily and quickly. I didn't start playing music up until, almost ten years ago because it didn't come to me quickly. And if it didn't come to me quickly, why do I want to spend my time doing it? I don't have a lot of music in my jam jar, let's say, until I was able to encounter and do a series of documentary films with this emergent musical tradition out of Veracruz, Mexico, called son jarocho or fandango, which is music rooted in participation, not necessarily performance. Mariachi's performance music, right? Son jarocho, the fandango, is participatory. So you participate at the level you can. And Ramon Gutierrez made me a jarana, which is the stringed guitar-like instrument. And he went, tocar. And I went, because there was these weekly workshops. I said, look, I bring my art to the table. I'm not a musician. He's like, no, you're not listening. Everyone participates. So
Mm.
because he did that, I was sort of forced to do it, right? And what I learned is, even though it was painstaking to get just to learn basic chords, anything you put effort into, you're going to get something good out of the back end. But I shifted, and it was shifted for me, and this was a who thing, from having to perform to participating. And once I embraced that participatory lens, it changed my whole dynamic and relationship to music. And it opened up that ability. So now I bring to the table what I bring to the table, but we want someone else to bring. Steve brings the guitar to the table. So that's how we connected there over a song. And then my son Case got involved, who's in his mid 20s. He lived in San Antonio for about 3 years, working in helping to build up a recording studio. So he actually has some professional recording and some real session chops working with a variety of musicians. My daughter Nico got involved. My friend Steve's daughter Anna got involved, and then another longtime friend James and his daughter Amaris and son Aiden got involved. So that's who we were trading tracks. So Steve would come up with a construct. I would try to melodioize it, our language, to put a lyric or an idea. And then people would add up their parts, and we eventually get everything to my son Case, who would take it all and try to organize it and put it into I think he was using Logic, which is a professional, digital recording studio, if you will, to make sense of it. So the Who, as I was, my friend Steve and I, my son Case, my daughter Nico, my friend James, his daughter Amaris, and that's how we basically had that same structure up through this third album. Since this new album has been completed, we've been finally able to recruit my wife Angelica and mother to Case and Nico to come in and keyboards, to play drums. When James isn't available, my brother Brian sits on bass or acoustic guitar, and his girlfriend Becky will join us on drums when we need it. So there's people coming and going. So there's lots of who's at the table, but that makes it fun. And if you look at the track listing and credits, we have a lot of guests who come in and adding guitar parts or horn parts or spoken word parts. So that makes it really, really fun.
This is such a beautiful case study in a kind of community building, especially in the arts, that I don't see very often, given that now we are instructed and mandated to be quite individualistic when it comes to our creative expression.
Yeah.
I feel like this is so timely of a case study to bring to the world. I mean, not just for the lovely work that you're making musically, but just as a way of doing things. It seems like that's a huge part of the way that you operate, because there's many facets to your life as a, not only are you a musician, but you're also a creative individual in other disciplines. But is there an explicit sort of in the back of your mind thought of like, this is a good way to do things, not just for us, but for our communities, for the world?
Yeah, I think the word intentionality can be overplayed a little bit sometimes. And I don't want to try to promise too much purposefulness, because there's also an aspect of just holding space to say, we don't really know what we're doing, but we're doing it and we're having a lot of fun
Yeah.
doing it. And as long as we can hold that, even though there's deadlines and we're this way, but when we think about what we call the defunctory as a particular model, particularly in today's world where there seems to be an excess of extraction or commodification of the arts, how do you hold space for the practice of community building, the practice of not only self-development, but collective development through the arts? So in our own small, creative, collective way, we try to hold that type of space. So we fundamentally ask the question, whose interests are being served through the work and the actions we're trying to take? Well, for the collective, we're trying to not selfishly serve our interests, but we're trying to create how are we going to, create moments of joy in this. At the same time, can what we're doing inspire or move people to action? Whether that's, political action or just the idea of opening one's eyes to reality action. So there is, I think, a real move for what we're trying to do for ourselves to give us a platform or a table to help rethink or reimagine or re-engage in what's going on in the world today. I know that sounds big and convoluted, but there is some serious truth to that. And what we've really decided is that when people ask us what genre that we're doing, you said we're genre agnostic. I'd say it's not that we're agnostic, because we recognize and we'll readily talk about the influences that are come our way. We just don't want to be beholden to any genre. So I love the 38 Special song. Hold on loosely, don't let go. If you cling too tightly, you're going to lose control. So we want to hold loosely this idea of being an intentional, but we also want to let the space for the creative to push things. So we come up with a process that worked for that song, but it doesn't mean it needs to become a formula or liturgical in the way we do the next song. But we learned some things on how doing it. So it's really trying to strike, I guess, a balance between being intentional, but at the same time, you never know what that wave's going to be like when it hits you. So you better be ready to ride it one way or the other.
Absolutely. And I will say genre agnostic was a term I really liked from, I believe it was a review that
Oh
came
yeah.
up. But yeah, I think the question was particularly trying to drive that point of the intentionality, like what kind of service is this, right? Like we get so hung up on like the idea of can it just be art and expression for the sake of it, for the well-being of a community, or does it have to be a thing that you preach or pass on to people? Like I think there's a very beautiful, delicate balance there, and not turn it into an outward product or thing to deliver to the masses. So I think that's wonderful to consider. But in terms of the production of this project, you mentioned that it was a different experience because you were all in the same room. Could you talk a bit about the differences from how the previous projects work? Like maybe if we could zero in on an example of the benefits of working in one place from this album in particular. Like, was there an album that you felt could have only worked while all of you working in the same space?
I think in this one, there was an evolution of a couple things. One, our ability as song crafters, the care that we took in the musicality, and a little bit more care we took in the sonic production. I guess as things go on, you always want to tweak things. I think the big difference between the other modalities of basically working in isolation, getting a track, and then, take like a track like our first album, like the Unsinkable song. Steve had sent me probably 16 bars of a riff and says, I can't do anything with this. It's unsyncable. And so I put it filed unsyncable. And then I started thinking about the lyric and then the lyric, if my lines were fire spun from golden remedy, you know, would you take me home? Would you take me home? It was part of us just trying to figure that out. But I had sent that. He wrote back the next lyric. Then we just started trading on lyrics. Then we put that basic, 16 bars. And I was using GarageBand because that's what I could do. Put it to a click track and then looped it and then came up with a melody line that I was playing. I played this double neck ukulele. It's sort of like this harana mode. So in son jarocho, the harana is sort of just like the melodic driving force. It's not the rhythm per se, but it's rhythmic and sort of melodic, but it's just the simple pulse of what's going on. And then I sent it back to Steve, who then put down the guitar line to it. Once we had that, we were able to send that to James, who worked out the bass and added the bass part to it. And because we recorded it to that drum pattern in GarageBand, it's almost like playing to a click, right? So we could all play from the same source material. The drummer that we've worked with, who's worked, his name's Zam Kenobi. He actually lives in Lyon, France. But so we send the tracks to him, and then he lays the drum tracks to that pre-recorded but in-time material, which is almost backwards because typically you record the drums and the bass first and layer on top of that. So in a weird way, the drums takes a different nuance. So that worked okay for the first two albums. And this one, we actually laid the basic constructs of the song down together in the same room, which meant we had to actively listen to each other in the situation of recording, not in the situation of me being alone, going it over and over and over again until I felt it got right. We had to listen to each other and allowed whatever that version of rightness for the song to happen in that moment of playing and recording together. So it had a different feel. And it lines up in some ways. We named our first album Skills Are Handy, Feel is Gold. But I think it took us to our third album to really get the gold feel ourselves. So that's why I'm really proud of this particular album in the process, is because I think we became better listeners to each other in a way that really added some more depth to the music and to the songs.
It certainly did. And I think that really shows itself in the unexpected moments where you think that even though there is a harmony that's happening musically, there are moments that are surprising in the best possible way. And you sort of realize that those are the transcendent things that happen when you are in the moment, where you are truly feeling. And maybe that's sort of the difference between just being individually contributing long distance or digitally. You're not making that eye contact. You're not getting a little bit closer and trying to understand what exactly the other person is going for. So it is truly liberating from yourself, right? Releasing yourself from yourself and just being present and having the thing belong to everyone at the same time, not just your singular contribution.
Yeah, I think that's a good word. I want to play with this idea of presence. So when we are located in the same room, we could have, let's just say, location or geographic presence. And we can pick up all those nuances of communication, body language, silences, long stares, those moments where, you read between the lines, if you will. When we were recording our first two, we didn't have location presence. I think we had proximal presence. We worked really hard to create presence outside of, like, we would have the Zoom conversations breaking down and discussing the songs, but we didn't have location presence in the recording of the songs. And there's I think a difference when you're actually recording together. I don't want to take anything away from what we did in the first two albums. I'm quite proud of them, but there's a depth in this Jamcation that I know goes a little deeper for me.
Let me ask you something about one of my favorite songs here, which was Chicken Fried Steak. I think that was one that really hit that apex that we're talking about. it's so much fun, but it's so it's so out there and beautiful, but it harkens back to traditions, right? To older music that it's not just a mishmash, but rather like a new assortment of, maybe I'm thinking of the 70s, maybe like that's just sort of the one through line that resonated with me a whole bunch of
Yeah.
times. But Chicken Fried Steak for sure felt like that was reaching a boiling point there in the best possible way.
Well, I'm gonna use your word. I think that one is a good example of being kaleidoscopic.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, that song, the basic construct was Steve and another friend, a part of our defunctory, Trevor, came up with that basic, you know, and he sent it to me and said, "Hey, do something. You know, what do you want to do with this?" And at that time, we had pretty much said we're done with songs for that. We don't need another song, right? You know, we had already gone through the overdubbing and getting to the mixing, and you want to put a period at the end of a sentence and call it done. But that one got in under the wire, and it struck me, and when I was listening to it, it brought me back um, to that 70s almost proto punk MC5, Iggy and the Stooges, you know, that type of, you know, just that energy, that raw energy. But at the same time, I had my notebook in front of me because I always keep a notebook of notes. And for some reason, a notebook from the late 80s, I think it was late 80s. And it was a road trip that Steve and I took, and we drove from Costa Mesa, California to San Francisco and back. And we had made a mixtape because we always, as one of the things we, even going way back then, we would trade mixtapes, and road trips were always a vehicle for the mixtape, or maybe the mixtape was the vehicle for the road trip. So Chicken Fried Steak came to be not a tribute to the road trip, it was a tribute to the mixtape that goes into the road trip. So at the end of the song, we're actually shouting out the bands that were actually on the mixtape that led to the crafting of the song. You know, so we're shouting out the Pixies, and we're shouting out Jimi Hendrix, and we're shouting out Sonic Youth and Fishbone, and you know, the Minutemen, and you know, so you know, we couldn't name every band because then the song would have been a 12-minute song, or 50, maybe it should be.
Extended
So
cut.
extended cut, yeah, the director's cut. Um, and then, but when he wrote the lyric, I really heard um, a different voice than anyone in the band actually has singing it. So we reached out to one of my daughter's friends who actually sang with us when we did a show at Folklife a couple years ago. And Kaylee came in and laid down the lead vocal for that track. And she, you know, it's like I wanted almost that Bon Scott meets Janis Joplin type of high energy voice to cut through. And I think she did a really great job helping to nail that one.
Oh, that's beautiful. I get a vibe here too, in terms of making some of these choices. Obviously, there it seems to be a collective function, right, of the band. But
Yeah.
is it, I love that you have at times directorial language that you're sort of like using here. But you work in film or video, right? Am I mistaken? Like, do you have a background in
Well,
production, or do you direct?
well, my daughter is actually she's a theater major and a stage manager.
Ah,
So I
okay.
think any language we get in stage management, because she has, I think, the four key features one needs to be a good stage manager. One, she's highly organized, right? Two, she has a creative streak and knows how to help people find their creativity. Three, she loves power tools. Four,
Right.
she's not afraid of heights. You know, gravity has no bearing on her. And
Yeah.
five, she loves to tell people what to do. So um, my wife and I have spent a long time working with what we call, how do we work to make films to do sort of reification of stories by working and working with communities to tell stories rather than telling stories about community. So this notion of working with, and how do we center ourselves to be not centered, and for the story and the participants to own it. And some of that sort of way shows up what we're trying to do with Now Defunkt. We don't necessarily, we try to be as collective as possible, but someone has to sort of stage manage a song, or if you
Right,
will, or
right.
the song, or chef the song. So whoever brings the initial construct or the lyric ultimately becomes that song shepherd. It's almost like being a servant leader, but has to trust and let go that when you hand that to the defunctory, that song's going to change and it's going to transform. And so one of the songs of our first album, which was a tribute to my wife's grandmother, Shirley Morrison, who was the leader of the Raging Grannies. You asked Shirley, "What are you protesting this week, Shirley?" She's like, "What do you got?" So the song Fleury Quo Garden, it started off as our tribute to sort of a Pink Floyd, you know, dear boy, you're going to go far, have a cigar.
Yeah.
And and then it turned into this sort of Americana, folky, sort of really laid back, the song totally changed in the defunctory from what it was originally brought. So yeah, you ask, do we direct? Yes. I think it's more of this documentary, holding space for scenes or improv to happen. But at the same time, you have to set the enabling conditions for things to happen. So things happen within a container, if you will. So it's a loose container. So again, it's this idea of holding space for each other to bring stuff into the process.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I'm glad you bring this up because I guess the reason I was going that direction was to get a sense of how you arrive at 11 tracks and how do you make those
Yeah.
decisions? Because I imagine there's so much to choose from, perhaps. When do you stop the iteration process of a song? When do you say, this feels like the right direction? And so maybe in terms of benchmark songs, where like, once you get to those first songs that you nail and you get down and you say, this is the direction, do you use that kind of terminology? Do you feel like that helps everyone sort of go to the same place, or is that not even a concern as you're building the
Yeah.
assortment of songs?
Yeah. And each song has a little different path, but they all sort of follow these contours. Someone will bring, we call it the construct, the initial idea. And that initial idea will lead to the construct, which is the sketching of the song within either using GarageBand or Logic, where there's maybe it's the guitar track and a demoed lyric and an electron, a digital drum to it, so that way it's in time. So before we take it to the next level, we say, look, you got to be able to put your part in time, so that way we can all work around it. Because if we're not recording together, it's hard to overdub to something that isn't in time. At the same time, we don't want to hold time as a thing that sets the aesthetic direction. There's chronology, there's chronos and kairos time. Chronology being, things need to be in a meter, but kairos is the quality of that meter. So we want to hold both. So the process, idea, construct, and then the construct will get handed around, and then that may come to me to add a lyric, or Case. In the last album, Nico contributed lyrics to 2 songs. Steve wrote 1 song all the way through. But once we get the construct, we're all sort of putting demo ideas that we can then sing our parts to the construct as a demo. Then we get together and we listen to it. And then we basically do, I don't want to make it sound too mechanical, but it's almost like doing peer review, right? We're listening to each other and we're critiquing each other. And it's really, it's a process to learn that, because this stuff does get personal and you take things personally, but we work really hard. What's going to serve the song? You're going to be passionate about something, but can you let go enough of what's overly personal? So you don't want to lose the personal, but how are these other ideas going to contribute? And then sometimes things get really heated and sometimes things just sort of flow. And then once we get that basic melodizing part down, so idea, construct, melodizing, then we'll go through, what? Jamcation, I really like steel drums on this. Who do we know who's a steel drum player we can get involved? Or James, okay, can you put down a bass? Oh, you're not available to play bass. Oh, or, so sometimes it's on our availability of who and when. And then we start working on the basic elements of what's going to bring the core sort of musicality to the song, which for us is drums and bass, guitars. And then the argument usually ensues, who's going to sing the song? Because none of us really want to sing the song. We all want to get someone else. I wrote this song for you to sing, right? But then someone says, Steve, you have to sing. This is your song. You have to sing the song, Steve.
Yeah.
No, come on. So that goes back and forth that way. And then we may be working on multiple songs paralleling this. But usually when it gets to the singing part and the final part, then we start saying, okay, does this song need any other little bit of je ne sais quoi, a little bit of Latin, a little bit of spice? What does this song need? This song needs some saffron, or this song needs a little more pepper. This song needs a little more salt. But we call that, and I'm Italian, so it's the test de sal. It's the test of salt. Yeah. How do you know it's any good? You got to listen to it. So we spend a lot of time listening to our demos and constructs in different modes. And then at some point we're going to say, okay, we don't want Case. Case is the one who basically takes all the songs and mixes them. We try to get every song in a mix stage, and then the mix process ensues. But sometimes a song is far enough along. Well, let's let them mix it so that it can become an example of what we want to do, and then take on another one. And then Case will take his mixes, and then we come back and listen to it again. And at this point, we've seeded the, in film language, the final cut, the final mix. We're going to trust him on that. He's going to listen to our input, but we're going to trust him on that.
No, that's such a wonderful thought out process. But I imagine after 3 albums, yes, you've defined it pretty well and what works for the group, but it continues to evolve, as you said. I'm curious of I don't want to say that there's like gatekeeping into the group or anything, but how does that work, or has it worked in the past in terms of keeping a unit that allows the group to thrive, but also are you, not that, we're ever concerned about letting the group grow into, like dozens of people, or like a polyphonic spree event where they just keep multiplying. But how does that work in terms of welcoming people into this group? And I'm asking just in terms of a practicality of trust, because I'm deeply interested in this. And I think it's just such a beautiful way to work that just as curiosity, how do you vet? And that sounds like such a crass way to say it, but how does that work?
Yeah, I think in our aspect, and I would say in other sort of creative endeavors, invariably someone becomes the chief worry officer. Right? It's not a task most people want to take on, whether that's the project manager or the stage manager. Someone has to worry this is getting done. It's getting done in a time. And our process, and usually that then gets related to funding, right? If you're getting funding, those folks who are funding you want to hold you beholden that you're going to turn it in at this date, and it's going to have this impact, and you need to demonstrate your measurables and all that. And I get that, and that's an important aspect. With this, since this is our family and friends creative collective, we haven't imposed. We ask whose interest is being served, but we've never really been beholden to a timeline or a deadline. It needs to get done now. I mean, it'll get done when it's ready, right? Michelangelo, the Pope, when is the ceiling's going to be done, Michelangelo? He'd go, it'll be done when it's done, right? So I get that, but at the same time, we don't want to be perpetually reworking and reworking and reworking. So we've created this funding mechanism where we self-finance our albums using Kickstarter to pre-sell the album. And once we raise that money, we know we've sold 100 albums, we sold 500 albums. That gives us enough to run a pressing. And so, when we tell our folks, if if you contribute this, you'll receive the album, the T-shirt, the candle, whatever else that may be by this date. So that's our that gives us a timeline. This last album, we actually worked with Washington's Records, which is a small, record label, if you will, here in Bellingham, Washington, who's working really hard to support independent music makers who want to put out vinyl. So that imposed a little bit of a timeline to what we're doing. So one, the vetting happens if we have a timeline, and I actually think deadlines can be pernicious, but they also give you a target. So I need them because if I know something's due on Friday, I'm usually waiting to Thursday to do it. If I don't know when it's due, it may never get done. So you got to know yourself. So in the band, I've adopted, and I probably wear the chief worry officer hat, and I try to do that with grace. But at the same time, someone has to play that role. In terms of collectively of who gets involved, because we've come out of this collective music making sort of tradition, and we all have our networks and friends. When I'm putting a song together, I'm thinking, oh, who I'd love to play on this song? I wonder if they're available. But then before reaching out, we'll have that conversation with the band, because our defunctory is, I want to say it's precious, not in the fragile way, because I think it has resilience, but we hold it seriously. Not just anyone gets in that process, right? Who gets in the process? Well, if you're willing to put the work in, and if you bring something tasty to the table and you're willing to share, those are probably the attributes of the vetting process. What are you bringing, and are you willing to share, right? And I think this really shows up the way we did our album release celebration this time. We did an album release in Seattle. We did an album release here in Bellingham, and the one in Bellingham we framed it as a hootenanny. And a hootenanny coming from folk music is we invited a lot of the musicians and people we've been playing around with and doing stuff with to come and share the stage with us in celebration, contribute a couple of your songs. Then we're all going to we'll showcase some of our songs, and we're all going to jam together on stage. So we did that at a place called the Roadhouse. And in Seattle, a big shout out to a place called Turntables and Trails. It's this great store in Seattle where the guy basically did his passion. He loved audio equipment and he loved hiking. So he set up a store called Turntables and Trails. So you got a room of old audiophile equipment, Macintosh and, Harman Kardon and all the old gear. And then anything you need to go hiking. And then on the evenings and weekends, they clear out the whole where all the records are, and they turn it into a space and a stage for people to come in and perform. So we invited people to perform with us in that celebratory mode. So yeah, it's again to try to sorry, this is a long windy answer to
this is perfect
to the vetting question. We want your contribution to serve the song. How do we know it serves the song? Well, what are you bringing to it in terms of your musicality, your sound, and do you really have a spirit of this idea of sharing and reciprocity? Is that the motivation? So those are the two gut checks in our conversations.
That's wonderful. I mean, I'm completely awestruck, of course, as I keep saying, by the music, by the work that you're putting together, but this beautiful way of collaborating, because it does seem so stinking rare, and I don't know why it can't be a more prevalent way of looking at the world. And so I guess I want to ask you how we can make this more compatible in the world that we live in, because this is something that can be shared as an idea, as a way of working and collaborating, that perhaps I'm blind to it, but I do feel like there's so much room for people to take this on, to be inspired by this kind of work and say, maybe we can do it over here. Right. So what do you think are the barriers in the framework, the capitalist framework that we exist in? Like what are the things to consider, right, to feel more compelled to take this on? Because it's just so readily available to people who want to be creative and want community. And we need it so desperately right now. Maybe I'm asking for myself.
maybe we do. I I think the real hard one, I'm trying to remember the exact quote, because I think the current frame of an extractive sort of political economy that extracts and commodifies makes it really hard for what we're doing, which is actually an ancient, time immemorial tradition of how people do things and how people have done things, whether that's you're around a table making gnocchi together like I did with my grandmother, or you're learning to make tamales together with the community. How do you know, it's this stone soup sort of theory. If you don't know the story, look up the story of stone soup. Someone brings a pot of water, so I'm going to make stone soup, and throws stones in the water. Wow, I wish I had some parsnips. So someone throws in a parsnip. Oh, I wish I had a little bit of this. And all of a sudden everyone contributes. And then all of a sudden you have this big soup that everyone can share from. So how do you move from extraction to transformation or creative economies? I think one of the things that we're fundamentally having an issue dealing with right now is, I think Gramsci, sorry, I don't mean to go philosophical, but he said, the old world is dying and the new world struggles to be born. And now is the time of monsters.
Wow.
And what we're trying to do is deal with the monsters. I mean, there are some serious monsters in today's world. So we've really said we're going to stake our claim on trying to be criticizing and energizing and being gigantic in what we're doing. And maybe that creates a shimmer, a ripple, or an effect. And if someone can catch that wave and find ways to do it, maybe it's not music, maybe it's in crafts, maybe it's in care of elders in a community aspect, maybe it's in the way we source food together from community pea patches and gardens. There's all these pockets of people doing these wonderful things. So it's out there. And sometimes you just got to let them alone. But if we had a network that was able to connect to them, I think that's one of the ways that we can do it. So we're putting this out there. You're creating a vehicle by which we get to talk about what we're doing. Hopefully there's people out there listening going, oh, cool. And I'm going to say, contact us. Let's chat. My thing is, buy me an espresso. I'll talk. We'll have a conversation. Sometimes we gotta have to do that virtually.
Right.
Can we break bread? Can we break bread and share a meal together? Because I find that's one vehicle to do that. Now, what I would say, and I have to sort of admit this a little bit up front, we do have a little bit of, let's say, a lever of privilege from the standpoint. I have a full-time job that affords me the ability to have some creative time and some room to play in this, but I'm not looking to use what we're doing as Now Defunkt as our main ability to sustain what we need to do in terms of our revenue create, which is really, so we're lucky that way. So in a sense, it's a little bit of our passion or side project, but I'm trying to decenter what is side and what's not side, because this has become an important fundamental factor of what we're doing. We've been able to, and I don't want to reduce things to, how are you getting the budget to do that? And could there be societal sort of frames of funding for people to take the artistic practice seriously? Because I think it's a serious practice, and how we build community. Because I would argue if we're going to build community, we need places and spaces to practice community building. We don't know how to do that, at least because of how I was taught in school not to do that. Some communities are raised, they're able to do that. We need to learn and listen. And, as good friends of mine would say, quieta la boca, be quiet, step back, take it in. So I think it's having, eyes to see and ears to hear where the practices are. I love the frame and the difference between being salutogenic, moving towards life giving, and pathogenic, moving towards death. And I think a lot of the toxic overhang of an extractive end of the world of what we call capitalist paradigm, right, leads to pathogenic, environmental concerns. I mean, how do we flip that? So yeah, what we're doing is, okay, we're making albums, we're making music, but it's more than that. It's the core process of how do we build each other up?
Well, Scott, I think that's exactly the message that we need right now. And I could talk and listen to you all day. I could really just continue to take in all of the wonderful gems that you're throwing my way. But I'm going to let you enjoy the rest of your day. And I want to congratulate you again on Jamcation and the work that you're doing, because not only is it deeply inspiring, but as I said, you're having a good time and you're making work that is brilliant and exciting and full of joy, which is something that we're certainly in short supply of these days. But it's been a pleasure, and I do hope we get to chat again, because I can't end it on a better note than that. You really gave me
Yeah.
a perfect one.
Yeah, well, Jaime, I just want to say thank you. And thank you for the platform that you've created, because you're allowing these individual voices from all across the world talk about what they're doing. So I get to learn from all these experiences. So you're providing, I think, a valuable, I call it harmonic modification, right? Through the harmony of work, maybe it's going to modify what we're doing. And can we collectively connect up? So looking forward to where we may be able to geographically share a space, share a meal. And who knows, maybe we'll get to jam together sometime.
Well, any one of those would be a pleasure. Scott, it really has been such a blast. And as I said, I hope we get to chat again down the road. And congrats again on this now award-winning album, right? If I'm not mistaken, it was recently, what was it? Intercontinental Music Awards winner 2025. So go check it out, folks. And of course, I'm going to have links in the episode description so folks can check it out. It's such a trip and such a fun time. All right, take care.
Okay, ciao.
Bye.